Good afternoon, everyone. Your Honor, I've been thinking about what to say for a long time. And the truth is, there are no perfect words for something like this. When everyone reads a speech before they get sentenced, they ask for mercy. But I'm here to accept my consequences for what I have done. The night that everything happened, not one thought in my mind was to leave or run. I didn't want this to happen. I was thinking about saving someone else's life instead of myself. That's why it was a quick reaction for me to wrap his shirt around my hand, apply pressure to his wound, and stop the bleeding while communicating with 911 to assist me. I wanted him to live.
Body cam video shows the moment when officers responded to the scene. Take a look.
And then I had the knife, but
Were you guys arguing before that?
no, we was just over here fighting, and then
So you guys are arguing?
yes, and then well, we wasn't arguing, we was just like play fighting and stuff, and that's when he was making me mad, and that's when I had the knife right here, and then he ended up running to it, but I'm not thinking because he already knew I had it. He was trying to get it from me, but he ended up running to it.
I could give you anywhere from a youth offender sentence, from straight probation, all the way up to 4 years in state prison, followed by a probationary sentence, or I could sentence you to state prison up to 30 years. Do you understand that?
I want the max. You know, that's what I want. A life for a life. You get what I'm saying? She took my son's life for no reason. She took my son's life because he was honest with her, that he didn't want to be with her, and she not realizing her actions, her behavior, and her entitlement is the reason why he didn't want to be with her.
And off the top at 7, we start with some breaking news. A teenage girl who stabbed her boyfriend to death has been sentenced to 17 years in prison.
Lollar was Malik's ex-boyfriend. Last month, he was stabbed in the chest by Malik at the Miami apartment building where he lived. Malik allegedly told police the two were horseplaying just before the stabbing, and she was arrested about a month later, charged with manslaughter, and was allowed to bond out with a GPS monitor.
Who horseplays with a knife?
She's been remorseful from day one. She immediately called 911 and started doing life-saving measures. Well, she wanted to accept responsibility.
I don't think she's remorseful. I think if she was really remorseful, she would have took accountability the first day it happened.
On December 20th, 2024, a frantic 911 call ripped through a Miami parking garage. Yahkeim Keimo Lollar, a 17-year-old star football player, was bleeding to death on the concrete. Standing over him was his 16-year-old girlfriend, Jahara Malik, holding a pink-handled knife, screaming that a harmless game of teenage horseplay had gone horribly wrong. For over a year, the public believed this was just an unimaginable tragedy. But just this month, in May 2026, an explosive 5-hour courtroom showdown completely tore that narrative apart. Because when the medical examiner calculated the physical force behind that single stab wound, they discovered something that made horseplay physically impossible. And the puzzle only deepens when you look at the violent secret Jahara was hiding before she ever walked into that garage. If you want to uncover the dark truth behind cases the headlines miss, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Drop a comment below. Do you think this was a tragic mistake or a calculated crime? Let's dive into the evidence. To understand the sheer weight of what happened in that parking garage, you first have to understand who Yahkeim Lollar really was. To his teammates and fans at Miami Northwestern Senior High School, he was Keimo, a fierce, disciplined running back wearing the green and yellow, a kid with enough explosive talent on the field to carve out a real future. But when he took off that helmet, Yahkeim wasn't interested in the chaotic street culture that claims so many young lives in Miami. He was a thinker. He spent his free time researching the stock market, tracking financial trends, and dreaming of a career as a stockbroker. The most heartbreaking glimpse into his world came directly from his aunt, Zeldrina Beecham. Her testimony in the courtroom wasn't just a standard statement, it was a window into a family's desperate attempt to shield a child. Zeldrina isn't just an aunt, she's a veteran Miami-Dade police officer. Because she wears the badge, she knows exactly how fast the city streets can swallow a young man whole. She testified passionately about how the family structured Yahkeim's entire life around a single protective boundary. They raised him to be a homebody. They actively encouraged him to stay inside his room, to lose himself in video games, and to keep his circle small. They thought if they could just keep him behind closed doors, the violence of the city could never touch him. They truly believed that inside his own home, right there in the model city neighborhood, he was completely safe. But the one variable they couldn't control was who he let into his life.
It will always be a fact
that you are a murderer. I ask you, Your Honor, to hold Jahara Malik accountable.
The calendar shifts to December 20th, 2024, just 5 days before Christmas. The holiday energy is buzzing through Miami, but inside Yahkeim's world, a quiet tension is building. Enter 16-year-old Jahara Malik. Earlier that afternoon, Jahara had gone out shopping, moving through the city doing ordinary errands. But according to her later statements to investigators, she claimed she felt an underlying sense of unease. She told police that she looked for her pepper spray before leaving, but when she couldn't find it, she made a deliberate, conscious choice. She walked into the kitchen, bypassed the usual safety items, and gripped a 4-inch kitchen knife. It had a bright pink handle, a deceptive splash of color on a lethal weapon. She slipped that blade away, hiding it from view, claiming it was strictly for protection against the dangers of the Miami streets. Later that evening, Jahara traveled down to Northwest 6th Court and 61st Street to meet up with Yahkeim at his apartment complex. On the surface, it looked like a standard teenage rendezvous. She was walking into his safe haven, carrying a concealed 4-inch blade, while he was stepping out of his protective sanctuary to meet the girl he trusted. Jahara's entire defense would later hinge on this exact moment. The idea that she was just an anxious, immature teenage girl carrying a weapon strictly for self-defense against outside threats, and that what followed was a tragic accident. But as investigators dug deeper, the timeline began to fracture, because surveillance cameras mounted inside the concrete stairwell of that dark parking garage captured the two running, moving in a way that looked erratic. And that is where the innocent narrative begins to completely unravel. If Jahara truly brought that pink-handled knife solely to protect herself from strangers in the city, why did she have it out in the stairwell while she was completely alone with Yahkeim? If this was just playful teenage horseplay that went too far, why did a series of highly tense text messages discovered on their phones, sent just minutes before they stepped into that garage, suggest an entirely different, incredibly volatile dynamic between them? The dark, echo-filled concrete of the model city parking garage became a stage for a sequence of events that would be replayed frame by investigators for over a year. The surveillance footage captured the two teenagers moving through the shadows of the stairwell, a frantic, erratic motion that shifted instantly from a seemingly chaotic run into a sudden, horrifying freeze frame. In a fraction of a second, the rhythm of their movement broke. There was a sudden lunge, a sharp, silent strike, and then the collapse. Yahkeim staggered, clutching his chest as his body gave way to the cold concrete floor. The single blow from that pink-handled 4-inch kitchen knife had found its mark, piercing through his clothing and straight into his chest cavity. The immediate aftermath was a blur of panic and desperation. Sirens wailed through the Miami night as first responders rushed to the scene at Northwest 6th Court and 61st Street. Paramedics worked furiously over Yahkeim's fading body before rushing him under flashing lights to Jackson Memorial Hospital's Ryder Trauma Center, the premier trauma facility in Miami, where doctors fought against the clock to save the young athlete. But the damage to his heart was too catastrophic. The boy who had been so carefully protected by his family, the running back with a bright future on and off the field, was pronounced dead, leaving behind a shattered household and a crime scene flooded with flashing police lights. It was right here, in the immediate wake of the chaos, that Jahara Malik's legal team began to construct what they believed was a flawless defense. When the police arrived, Jahara hadn't run away. She didn't try to hide the weapon or flee into the Miami night to escape consequences. Instead, the footage and the emergency logs showed a 16-year-old girl completely unraveled by panic. The moment Yahkeim collapsed, Jahara dropped the bloody knife onto the concrete, pulled out her phone, and frantically dialed 911. With trembling hands, she stayed by his side, desperately applying pressure to the gaping wound, trying to hold his life together as she sobbed into the receiver.
We have some new video this morning showing the moments after a teenager stabbed and killed her boyfriend. It happened during an argument in 2024. We do want to warn you that the video you're about to see is disturbing. You hear the sounds from that confrontation. Authorities say that 18-year-old Jahara Malik stabbed Yahkeim Lollar at the apartment garage back in 2024. It happened in Miami, right near Northwest 6th Court and 61st Street.
When the case eventually moved toward the courtroom, her defense attorneys leaned heavily into this imagery. They presented Jahara not as a calculated killer, but as a terrified, deeply immature child who was utterly consumed by instant, agonizing regret. They pointed out her pristine record, She had 0 prior run-ins with the law, no history of criminal delinquency, and was, by all accounts, just a regular teenager. Her lawyers argued passionately that this wasn't a murder. It was a tragic, reckless accident born of youthful stupidity. It was a game of teenage horseplay that had gone unfathomably wrong. A momentary slip of a knife she had only brought along for self-defense.
The state said they were not seeking to jail her and explained why.
The defendant in this case is 17 and had no priors. That is the only reason the state is not lockstep with the family.
To anyone watching the early state of the proceedings, she cut the figure of a broken young girl trapped in a living nightmare of her own accidental making. To the public, she looked like a grieving teenager trapped in a horrific accident, an innocent girl whose life was ruined by a split-second mistake. But when the final sentencing hearing arrived in May 2026, the courtroom doors closed, the lights dimmed, and the prosecution dropped a forensic bombshell that shattered the innocent persona entirely, and proving that the blade didn't just accidentally slip, but had been driven into Yahkeim's body with a terrifying, undeniable amount of violent intent. When the prosecution stepped forward in that Miami courtroom in May 2026, they didn't just counter the defense's narrative with emotional arguments. They countered it with the unyielding, cold laws of forensic physics. They presented a meticulous, layer-by-layer medical breakdown of exactly what happened to Yahkeim's body the moment that blade made contact, completely dismantling the idea of a playful accident. The state medical examiner's findings made one thing undeniably clear. This was not a superficial accidental poke during a frantic scuffle. This was a high-velocity, maximum-force thrust. To understand the sheer violence of that moment, you have to look at the physical barriers the weapon had to breach. Yahkeim wasn't wearing light summer clothes. It was December, and he was wearing a thick, heavy fabric winter hoodie. Beneath that hoodie was his shirt. Beneath the shirt was layers of dense chest muscle. But the most damning piece of forensic evidence lay even deeper. The prosecution proved that the 4-inch kitchen knife didn't just slide between his ribs. It was driven with such immense, concentrated power that the blade actually slammed directly into a solid human rib bone, fracturing and piercing straight through the bone structure before plunging deep into the muscle of his heart. Medical experts testified that a human rib bone requires an extraordinary amount of deliberate, heavy force to puncture, force that simply cannot be generated by a casual, accidental slip during a teenage game. It required a full extension, aggressive drive. With the horseplay narrative already fracturing under the weight of science, the state delivered their true centerpiece of the hearing, the testimony of the lead detective. Taking the stand, the detective systematically stripped away Jahara Malik's persona as an innocent, soft-spoken teenager caught in a bad situation. The state revealed a documented, deeply troubling trail of text messages, digital records, and witness statements that painted a radically different picture of the relationship. It turned out that this wasn't a sudden, unprompted flash of violence out of nowhere. The detective exposed a history of volatile, highly aggressive behavior from Jahara, documenting a pattern of intense domestic arguments and escalating toxic hostility leading up to that December night. The state argued that carrying the knife that evening wasn't a panicked afterthought for self-defense against strangers. It was part of a dangerous pattern of escalation. By the time the detective stepped down, the image of the terrified child unraveled by instant regret was completely gone, replaced by the chilling reality of an angry, armed young woman who brought a lethal weapon to a volatile dispute. The state made the ultimate decision to strip away her juvenile protections and try 16-year-old Jahara as an adult. When you look at the sheer, brutal force required to literally crack open a human rib bone, do you believe this could ever truly be classified as an accident or teenage horseplay? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button right now to stay updated on true crime cases the mainstream media overlooks, because we are stepping directly into the final hours of this emotional sentencing hearing. Faced with this undeniable forensic reality and the terrifying prospect of a trial where a jury would see the graphic medical diagrams, Jahara and her legal teams did something no one in the courtroom expected. Rather than trying to fight the evidence or secure a watered-down deal, she bypassed a jury trial entirely and entered an open guilty plea to manslaughter with a deadly weapon. By entering an open plea, there was no pre-negotiated sentence, no guarantee of leniency, and no safety net. What Jahara didn't realize at the time was that by throwing herself completely on the mercy of the court, her entire future now rested solely in the hands of a judge who was about to formulate a completely unprecedented psychological punishment.
Now, this is another breaking story we're following for you. A teenage girl stabbed her boyfriend to death amid an argument, and today, nearly 2 years later, she's pleaded guilty. The deadly stabbing happened in Northwest Miami-Dade, December of 2024.
When it comes to prison time, she is facing up to 30 years behind bars. Take a look. This is Jahara Malik. She was 17 at the time that she stabbed her boyfriend. She's charged with manslaughter for killing her boyfriend, 17-year-old Yahkeim Lollar. Lollar's family has been very vocal since the beginning, holding protests outside the Miami-Dade State Attorney's office, demanding accountability. Their calls for justice eventually led prosecutors to actually file charges against Malik more than a month after the killing. Today, nearly 2 years later, the case will not go to trial. There was no plea offer. Instead, Malik pleaded guilty and will allow a judge to decide her punishment. The victim's family says they want the max here, which is, like I mentioned, 30 years in prison. Let's listen to what they told us.
Jahara Malik, now 18 years old, pleading guilty Monday to charges of manslaughter and carrying a concealed weapon.
It's like bittersweet. It took a year, 2 months, and 26 days for her to, acknowledge or even hold accountability for what she did to my son.
The atmosphere inside the Miami-Dade courtroom during that exhausting 5-hour sentencing hearing was thick with a heavy, suffocating grief. On one side sat a family entirely consumed by a loss they had spent their whole lives trying to prevent. On the other, a teenager watching her youth slip away in real time. Miami-Dade Circuit Judge Christine Hernandez presided over a courtroom that felt less like a standard legal proceeding and more like an open, emotional wound. The raw center of this entire showdown belonged to Yahkeim's family. When his relatives took the podium to deliver their victim impact statements, the room fell dead silent. His aunt, the veteran police officer who had tried so fiercely to shield him from the city's statistics, spoke with a devastating mix of anger and sorrow. The family wept openly as they described the cruel irony of a boy who followed every single rule, a homebody who stayed in his room to avoid the violence of the world, only to have that very violence brought directly to his doorstep by someone he loved. They demanded the absolute maximum penalty under the law, telling the judge that no amount of time could ever fill the void left by the brilliant young man they had lost. Faced with the crushing weight of the family's grief, Jahara's defense team launched their final, desperate plea for mercy. They asked Judge Hernandez for a downward departure, a legal mechanism that would allow the court to bypass standard adult prison guidelines. Her lawyers argued passionately that sending an emotionally immature teenager to a harsh state penitentiary would utterly destroy any chance of rehabilitation. Instead, they begged the judge to sentence her as a youthful offender, advocating for a localized, highly structured military-style boot camp program designed to reform young offenders. Then the courtroom watched as Jahara herself stood up to speak. Tears streamed down her face, her voice trembling and cracking as she addressed the court and Yahkeim's family directly. She looked small, stripped of any aggression as she wept, saying, "I was reckless. That knife should never have been out. The family wants me in prison, but I'm in my own prison for the rest of my life." It was a moment of profound, agonizing theater, a young girl begging not to be discarded by the justice system, trying to convince the bench that her internal guilt was already a life sentence. But Judge Christine Hernandez remained unswayed by the theatrical appeals for a boot camp program. While she acknowledged Jahara's youth and the palpable remorse echoing through her statement, the judge looked back at the cold, hard facts of the case. The 4-inch blade, the history of escalating arguments, and the sheer, brutal physical force required to puncture a human rib. The court ruled that the gravity of taking a life required an adult punishment. The hammer fell with absolute finality. Judge Hernandez denied the request for the youthful offender boot camp and sentenced Jahara Malik to 17 years in a Florida state prison, to be followed immediately by 5 years of strict probation.
The court also recognizes that Ms. Malik, you are young. You are a young woman, but youth does not excuse what occurred that day. The law takes it into account and recognizes that it is your youth that affects your decision making and it affected your judgment. But your youth does not excuse the foreseeable consequences of the choices that you made. So at this time, she will be remanded into the custody of the Department of Corrections to serve her sentence. Count 2 will be an adjudication, 5 years. Please. 5 years. Then adjudication. 360.
I'm going to appoint the office of the public defenders. For purposes of appeal.
Judge, 364 for the visiting.
The 17-year sentence was incredibly heavy, sending shockwaves through Jahara's side of the courtroom. But it was the final psychological condition quietly added by the judge to her probation terms that left everyone in attendance completely stunned and utterly silent. It was a creative, haunting piece of judicial engineering meant to ensure that no matter how many years passed, Jahara could never truly escape the reality of what she had done. To fully understand the psychological depth of this punishment, you have to look closely at how it forces Jahara to confront her past. Judge Hernandez ordered that every single year, on the exact date of December 20th, the permanent, painful anniversary of the night she drove that kitchen knife into Yahkeim's chest, Jahara Malik is legally mandated to sit down and write a handwritten letter. This isn't a passive check-in with a probation officer. It is a mandatory annual reflection written by her own hand, forcing her to confront the life she stole, analyze the permanent wreckage she left behind, and document exactly how her volatile actions destroyed two entirely different families forever. Long after she leaves the prison walls, every single December 20th will serve as a forced legal confrontation with the ghost of her 16th year. It is a chilling end to a story that began with so much promise. A rising football star and brilliant future stockbroker who did everything right to stay safe from the streets, only to be taken away by the one person he trusted enough to let past his front door. If you want to see how another seemingly minor relationship argument escalated into an equally deceptive and chilling forensic investigation, click on the video right here on your screen and keep the watch hours rolling.